Services Liverpool branch. You said on the bottom of the last one is no return to the past. This is precisely what Robert Owen and a number of colleagues set up in Rochdale in the late 1700s, the cooperative movement. And if you look at what you said, cooperative movements, societies, every city had a society. It had education above each shop, still has banks, credit unions, insurance, the models, we have model housing, factories, we have pubs, shops, post offices, breweries. All this is the cooperative movement, rehashed. The only problem is the cooperative movement had to close together because each society had its own director, board, and it was inefficient. And this is precisely, hopefully it won't, but this seems to be going the same way. The co-op movement now is in about 3 large groups. The co-op group from Manchester, just recently taken over the United, which covered this area. We've taken over, they've all merged into one group now because that's the only way you can do it efficiently. But I do admire you stealing the cooperative movement's logo and ethics, and hopefully it'll succeed, but it'll eventually contract.
I think the first thing to say, in 1945, when the Attlee government established the welfare state, they actively chose to create a welfare state that was hierarchical and mass-produced, exactly like the factories that dominated the industry of the time. They did that in the face of strong opposition from the cooperative movement and from significant parts of the Liberal Party and the Labour Party of the time. And Michael Young, who wrote the 1945 manifesto, resigned from his job in Downing Street, went back to the East End of London, complaining that the Labour government had been captured by bigism. And one of the interesting things for me at this moment, and I think you're onto something, it's not a return to the past, but if you go to Lambeth Council, which is a Labour council, they've decided to be a John Lewis council, and you now get a discount on your council tax if you volunteer above a certain level. They're seeking to mutualise various parts of the business process. Ed Bulls, as Education Secretary, rolled out 1,000 cooperative schools before he stepped down. And I think in this area around mutualism, cooperation, new forms of small-scale, human-scale organisation, there are big opportunities. And I would say that we need to reinvent the cooperative movement for new times. Last year I wrote a report with a group of people at Oxford University before I was in government, recommending that the best way to deal with the failed banks was to remutualise them and give every citizen a share, so that they genuinely were the people's banks. And so I think that is one path. But I think with the coalition, we need to be careful that this isn't only about co-ops, although that's one option. These are people that will be relaxed with private sector entrants, and they would also want to see lots and lots of new voluntary sector entrants and a reinvention of the way that traditional state services delivered too. But yeah, if we can get the co-op thing working in Sussex as well as the North West, that'd be great.
Okay. There's one more question from
Steve York from First Choice owns Oldham, which is an Almo, but surely to transfer to become a registered social landlord. Most of the people who've worked in social housing will be acutely aware of the difficulty of engaging with people at a local level. I think particularly those people who are socially and economically excluded. I'd be interested to know what mechanisms might be in place to make that transition from a centralist state to an empowering state, particularly in the context of working with the socially excluded. You made the point very well around people being able to have the right to buy or to save an asset. The big question is how, what money available, and how will that actually happen in practice?
Yeah, I think and I just want to emphasise here, I'm trying to articulate an agenda of the government rather than give you my own personal worldview, right? We could get into a separate debate a couple of years later. But I think there would be a strong view that by de-ring fencing lots of the money that flows to the local level, local parts of government, not just local government, but local government and the NHS and others, by collaborating in new and creative ways, can respond to local needs, particularly of the poorest and the most excluded. And I think the view at the centre would be, there isn't as much money as there has been, simply because there isn't. but the money that we've got needs to be driven to the local level to as many of the ring fencing and targets from the centre that have been on it lifted as possible, so that flexible local responses can be created by local people. Does this mean that responses in Chichester and in Bacup will be the same? No, it doesn't. Does it mean that you might have some unevenness, or the Labour front bench would call some inequalities? Well, let's put it this way, ministers have a high appetite for risk and for innovation and for taking some big risks at the moment. And so it will be interesting to see whether and if there are any failures, and whether or not they're treated in the same way as a business failure. You win some or you lose some, or whether politically that sort of thing is possible or not. But at the moment, the appetite for risk and for variation is very high, driving it all down to the local level for local people to identify all the responses.
Thank you very much. Just one final question, and this will be the last one before we move on to Sarah. Thank you.
John Perry from Helena Partnerships. I've been to several of the events around the big society, and to be honest with you, it feels as though there's quite a lot of clarity in what you've said today compared to some of the ones I've been to. What I'm a little bit uneasy about is the idea of it sounds like it's possibly testing out for sort of guinea pigs, if you like, and testing people out. And particularly, you talked about setting up mutuals and things like that to support, say maybe care, vulnerable groups and disabled people, and that kind of worries me a little bit. So I just wondered if you've got any thoughts around that.
Yeah, I mean, just on this mutuals thing, in 1992, and this is part of how the big society no doubt worked. In 92, a group of us that were community workers in central Southampton at that time got together and we started an industrial provident friendly society. And that's because we thought we could deliver social care in the city better than others. Today, that outfit turns over £11 million, 700 staff and various members, and does community transport, social enterprise, hospital at home. And its ratings for service to clients who come on referrals and on contracts from the state are way above those of other local providers. And I think on a human scale, where people feel a sense of membership, and there are examples like this, we've already heard in the North West and in Sunderland and elsewhere, you get more bang for your buck, number one. And then number two, in the rural area to the west of Southampton, there was a village hospital that had been shut. There was a big community campaign to reopen it as the maternity ward that local people had always known. And they sat down with us and they sat down with PCT, and what we did together was first of all, we arranged for an asset transfer of that community hospital out of the NHS and into another community social enterprise. And we reinvented the space as a health and well-being centre where you can now manage your own diabetes conditions, and there's a gym for the elderly and the frail, and workshops for people with mental health challenges, and all sorts of other stuff going on. It means that health services delivered into isolated rural area very creatively, costing far less than the hospital ever cost before. There's better local services, much more civic ownership. And I think if that can be replicated again and again and again and again, it's not all of the solution, but it's certainly part of the solution to more flexible, responsive public services going forward.
Thank you. If you do have any other questions for Francis, I'm not sure if he's able to stay till coffee break or not, he might have to shoot off his train. But just to say thank you very much for your contribution this morning. If you do have any questions, please do write them down on the cards, and we'll get an answer back to you via the web. But also, hopefully Francis's details were up there a second ago.
Yeah. If anyone wants to bring up, send me an email. Yeah. Just write to say you right-wing fascist, or whatever it is.